Shaka explained that an archaeologist in the past staked his life on it, and almost revealed the ancient kingdom's name. He also said that, at the same location, the machines seen on Egghead were discovered, and their manufacture agreed upon. This led Robin to question if he's referring to the machine being built during the Void Century, asking Shaka how much is truly known to him. Next panel shows Nami saying, "You know something about this, Robin." Shaka replies and says no doubt it's a painful memory. But 22 years ago, your home of Ohara was eradicated by a buster call. I think that happened because Ohara uncovered the details of that kingdom existence. Shaka continues to say, I believe the history of the Void Century is the history of a conflict. One between an alliance of 20 nations and the Forgotten Advanced Kingdom. The victorious 20 went on to form the world government and shape history as we know it. And to ensure that the ideas of the ancient kingdom wouldn't live on. And Shaka says they erased every trace of it from history. What Shaka said left the Straw Hat shocked. With Nami saying what that's crazy. Usopp says what this is for real. Frankie says what an epic romantic tale. Sanji shoutly says hang on Vegapunk. You mean everyone who knows about this? Shaka finishes Sanji's sentence and say. Gets eliminated indeed. Usopp while having a breakdown Shaka says like I said this is just a conjecture. And asks Robin whether he's right and that discovery is why Ohara was wiped out. Shaka continues to say then wouldn't the government actions be tantamount to a confirmation? Robin replies by saying why are you asking about this? The scholars did devise a theory after all their extensive research. But wouldn't someone as high up in the government as you know about it already? Shaka replies and says I'm afraid government affiliation makes no difference. I'm kept in the dark like everybody else. And Shaka says even bringing this topic up to them would result in my immediate erasure. Robin shoutly say if that's true how could you know they were researching that kingdom? All the books and material were on Ohara and they were. Shaka replies by saying the will of Ohara lives on. And just how Robin survived Ohara, so did the knowledge of Professor Clover, Vegapunk's old friend. He elaborates that he returned to Ohara several months later to find it a burnt field, where he offered a tribute of flowers to Clover. He explains that Clover was once an adventurer obsessed with learning about the Void Century, being undeterred by his 10 imprisonments. He eventually settled in Ohara, and as the world's most famous archaeologist, drew others thirsting for knowledge to the island. Vegapunk speculates that this gathering of knowledge is what caused the island to be burned down. Vegapunk proceeds to explain that upon arriving at Ohara several months later, he saw a giant lake in the center of the island with various literature sunken at its bottom. One Piece Chapter 1066 offers a flashback here, where the younger Vegapunk is seen theorizing that scholars threw books into the lake to protect them from the Buster Call's flames and destruction. Shaka, in the present, explains that even if foot soldiers saw them, their value wouldn't be known, with the victory being Ohara's and Vegapunk shedding tears of joy at their win. Meanwhile, another flashback shows Robin talking to her mother, Nico Alvia, who tells her she still has something left to do while instructing her daughter to get off the island. Alvia seems to have been part of the Ohara scholars who threw the books into the lake, internally telling Robin that history is humanity's treasure. She also says that for the sake of all of their futures, referring to Robin and other children like her in the world, they won't give up. The flashback then cuts back to Robin and Jaguar D. Saul, and the latter is seen telling the former to be proud of her mother and explaining that Ohara fought against the world. One Piece Chapter 1066 then returns to the present, where Robin is seen crying before she confirms Vegapunk's theory on Ohara and what they learned. She asks where the books in the lake are now, as Vegapunk explains that he wanted to bring them to Punk Hazard, but it wasn't worth the risk of higher-ups in the government learning of it. Returning to Vegapunk's flashback several months after the Buster Call, One Piece Chapter 1066 sees the younger Vegapunk witnessing various giants going into the lake. He realizes that the giants are pulling the books out of the lake, wondering what he should do and whether the giants know of their value. Suddenly, Monkey D. Dragon arrives, greeting Vegapunk like an old friend while saying it's been a while. He even mocks his massively huge head here, suggesting the two were close, old friends. Realizing who it is, Vegapunk asks what he's doing here, to which Dragon responds by asking Vegapunk the same question while saying he was friends with Professor Clover. A shocked Vegapunk seeks confirmation, before once more monologuing about Clover's past while also sharing his disbelief in the intel regarding Clover's, plotting the world's destruction. Dragon asks Vegapunk if he's worried about the giants, reassuring him that they're not thieves and have come from Elbaf with knowledge of the literature's value. He shares that their captain is, a strange man with bandages covering his whole body, which leakers have since confirmed to be Jaguar D. Saul, marking his first appearance in over 650 chapters in One Piece chapter 1066. Dragon continues, sharing that Saul essentially swore that he would protect the treasures that Oharans died to save, before sharing the concern that Vegapunk came to discard the literature. Vegapunk rejects this explanation, prompting Dragon to share his disappointment with his friends joining the world government, saying he was going to invite him to join his revolutionary army. However, Vegapunk says that he can't use his intellect and technology with the penniless revolutionary army, prompting Dragon to yield to him. Vegapunk then says that there are those within the world government and Marines who share Dragon's sentiment, telling his friend not to lose sight of his goal. However, Dragon confesses that the Ohara incident is simply too much, questioning how scholars who were merely researching the past could be eradicated so mercilessly. He resolves to create an army that can fight for the people, as Vegapunk questions how someone who can hate war like him could do such a thing. Dragon then swears to change the world and not let Clover's death and Ohara's will be in vain. One Piece chapter 1066 then sees Nami praising Dragon's passion, while Usopp questions if Shaka said Elbaf's name. Robin says she had no idea of Dragon and Clover's connection, as Frankie questions why Kuma saved them and why Vegapunk modified Kuma. Sanji, meanwhile, calls Ivankov a bastard after realizing he's a founding member of the Revolutionary Army. Shaka claims that Ohara's literature can't be found by the world government, saying he instead secretly went to Elbaf and read all the literature there. This then formed the basis of his knowledge, as well as everything he's been able to invent throughout his career. It's once again confirmed here that the Giants' leader was Saul, with Vegapunk sharing he's still alive and laying low. Robin smiles, and thanks Shaka for not letting the battles that the Oharans fought go to waste with the destruction of their knowledge. Suddenly, One Piece chapter 1066 sees the shoes the Straw Hats are wearing begin to move on their own, as Shaka apologizes for not letting them go yet but beckons them all to come see something. One Piece chapter 1066 then shifts perspective to Luffy's group, where Luffy tells Chopper that he sees no riding spot on the giant robot. Chopper guesses that it's the kind of robot that moves on its own, attempting to activate it with his voice. Luffy thinks that the robot must have a name, and the name needs to be said to get it to move, prompting he and Chopper to tell Robonosuke to move. Bonnie questions if they're kids, saying there's no way the robot will move when it suddenly explodes. The real Vegapunk is then heard asking someone to save him, calling it another failure and saying that space-time must have contorted during teleportation. Luffy questions who it is, before turning to save him, as Bonnie begins to realize who they've just met. Vegapunk then asks Luffy if he's Dragon's son, saying he knew Luffy would one day come here. He also recognizes Bonnie, telling her she's grown a lot and that he's glad to see her doing well. Luffy asks Vegapunk why he's floating, explaining that Luffy's shoes also have the capability to do so with a button and lever. Luffy, Vegapunk, and Chopper all blast into the sky, as One Piece chapter 1066 formally introduces Vegapunk, calling him the man with the best brain in the world, and reaffirming him as the leader of the Special Science Group. Pythagoras thanks CP0 for returning the Seraphim to Egghead Island and says that it can make its way back on its own. He also says that they can leave since their mission is now complete, but the agents are not so easily convinced. Kaku, in particular, tells Pythagoras not to be so cold to them since they spent a long time trying to reach him, so he should at least show some hospitality. However, Pythagoras says they should try the G14 branch instead. Rob Lucci decides to speak to Pythagoras and asks him if he knows anything about a missing ship near Egghead Island. When Pythagoras asks for clarity, Lucci explains that 2 months ago, a ship from CP5 disappeared, and a month ago, a ship from CP7, and from approximately 2 weeks ago, one from CP8. He asks why none of these world government ships have been seen or heard from again, and Pythagoras says that he should have confirmed they had all departed, but Lilith takes the Den Den Mushi from him and angrily accuses him of blaming them for the ship's disappearances. Pythagoras manages to get Lilith to stop talking and hangs up on Lucci. In response, Lucci asks that the Seraphim, dubbed S-Bear, needs to use its abilities to get everyone to the island, meaning they would abandon ship and have it be destroyed by the mechanized sea beasts. On Mamwaro Island, the Revolutionary Army continues chasing after Bartholomew Kuma, who uses his devil fruit powers to warp off the island. In the scrapyard, Luffy asks Dr. Vegapunk why he wants him to take him off the island, especially since his lab is here. Vegapunk admits this to be true, but also says that he has completely used up all of the world government's research funds and has been doing as he pleased since then. Despite this, he does not possess the manpower or resources required to continue bringing his ideas to fruition. He then announces that his big dream is to use science in order to create a world where energy would be provided for all, free of charge. Luffy does not exactly understand, and Jinbei tells him that resources that produce energy are often fought over by other countries, thus resulting in war. Vegapunk confirms and says that energy exists everywhere in the world, and he wishes to convert it to usable power, thereby removing the need for such wars. Though he does not quite understand yet, Luffy, while stating he does not wish to be a hero, says that a person who wants to make others happy is good, but he still wonders why he wants to leave Egghead. Vegapunk says that the energy he seeks to find was what powered the ancient robot, and in trying to find it, he has had to explore the Void Century and ultimately discover the truth. Just then, they hear an explosion, and Vegapunk says that since he had delved too deep, the world government wants to kill him. He also speculates that CP0 has arrived, and further speculates they are responsible for that explosion, resulting in Jinbei and Vegapunk to tell Luffy what CP0 is compared to CP9. In the meantime, Lucci, Kaku, Stussy, and their troops have arrived in Fabrioface, with Kaku left in awe over the futuristic island. The people see them and are left confused by their unique appearances and arrival as they note that 2 sea beasts were destroyed. Pythagoras tells Shaka that CP0 managed to invade Egghead, causing Usopp and Nami to freak out. Seeing how they were so willing to sacrifice their ship and use S-Bear to strike against them, Shaka decides to respond in kind. He orders all researchers to evacuate and has Atlas head back to the Labaface while also having S-Shark, and the Seraphim clones of Dracula Mahawk and Boa Hancock dubbed S-Hawk, and S-Snake, respectively, ready for battle, with Sentomaru in charge of commanding them. Back in the scrapyard, Vegapunk asks Luffy if he will take him off the island, to which the latter ultimately accepts, even though the deciding factor was because Vegapunk's head is so strange. Nevertheless, Vegapunk expresses his gratitude and tells them to bring Jewelry Bonnie with them to Labaface, and that they should all leave before Fabrioface becomes a battlefield. With that, Vegapunk teleports away, leaving Luffy and Chopper surprised. Meanwhile, the CP0 agents are confronted by Vegapunk's holograms. Their guns fail to work and Kaku's attacks are proven futile as well, even though he was enthusiastic over fighting something like a space monster. Stussy tells everyone that it is just a hologram, much to their annoyance that she did not mention that fact sooner. Lucci admits that Stussy is well informed, and she says being on Egghead is nostalgic for her. Kaku decides to fly above the cloud that Labaface is on, but Stussy points out 2 lines on the cloud. She then says that if someone crosses that line, then lasers will be fired, as what Kaku passed was the Frontier Dome, that serves as an interception system that protects Labaface. Kaku ends up getting blasted and falls back down to the ground, prompting both him and Lucci to tell her not to be so coy and tell them these things beforehand. Eventually, Atlas arrives on the scene and tries to fight them, but Shaka warns her that she is no match for them, and he is proven correct when Lucci transforms into his hybrid form and attacks Atlas with Rokuogan, destroying half of her face in the process. Atlas collapses, prompting all the researchers to start evacuating, as Lucci notes that Atlas is still alive. Just then, Luffy and the others arrive on top, and he and Lucci lock eyes. All of the researchers start fleeing after witnessing Atlas fall to rob Lucci, whom Chopper remembers. Lucci's attack makes Jinbei realize that CP0 came to kill Dr. Vegapunk, but Luffy asks Lucci why he is here. Lucci points out that Egghead is still under world government jurisdiction, and Chopper tells Luffy that they need to go. Kaku says, "Dear me, the Straw Hat Pirates, and it looks like they are with Jewelry Bonnie. Well, that's that Lucci. We can't lay a hand on them. Straw Hat is officially an emperor now. We can't engage him without orders." Luffy asks Jinbei to look after Bonnie. Stussy says emperors have considerable backing behind them. Even a small tiff can flare up into an all-out war. She asks her companion to contact the Marines. Luffy is shocked to see one of his friends on the ground and says, "That kid from before, this is awful." Lucci replies to Kaku and Stussy and says, "I'm aware of the consequences and tell Luffy to keep out of this. It's a government business." Luffy replies and says that kid gave us food. Everyone is running away from Lucci and Luffy. Chopper is seen saying, "Wait Luffy, don't start now." Jinbei says, "You'd better be sure you want to do this, Luffy. They'll consider this a major incident." Nami says, "What the heck? Did that Lucci guy always look like that? Shaka is surprised and says, what speed, and explains that most awakened zone powers tend to overwhelm the user's mind, but this. Next panel shows Lucci in his devil fruit awakened form, and Lucci says, you're not the only one who's gotten stronger, Straw Hat. Kaku tells Lucci to stand down, we still don't have permission. Vegapunk asks the Straw Hats and says, is he on screen the White Warrior? Frankie is surprised to see the real Vegapunk. Vegapunk asks the Straw Hat Pirates and says, you wouldn't happen to know the story behind Straw Hat's transformation, do tell. Nami says, we are not sure, to be honest. Isn't it one of his gum powers? Vegapunk says, that's funny, there's no mention of any gum fruit in the old Devil Fruit Encyclopedia. All Straw Hats are shocked. Usopp says, I mean, you say that, but that's what Luffy's always called it. Vegapunk says, how sublime, he looks just like that god described in the ancient texts. Sanji replies and says, God, are you senile? That's just Luffy. Vegapunk clarifies and says, I speak of the warrior of liberation, whose antics could bring a smile to anyone's lips, also known as the sun god Nika. Luffy, while fighting Lucci, is seen laughing. Nami says, Nika, I have never heard that name. Vegapunk says, naturally, it's been wiped from history, and yet as long as people's desires persist, such a thing will never cease to be. We owe all there is to desire. For instance, devil fruits are the embodiment of what people wish they could become, and the reason why the sea, which he calls the mother of all nature, makes devil fruit users unable to swim is because it considers these wishes to transcend the world people wish to live in as abnormalities. His theory leaves the Straw Hat crew completely stunned. During Vegapunk's speech, Luffy and Lucci were fighting one another in their awakened states. As they fight though, Sentomaru arrives and asks Vegapunk what he is supposed to do, since he believes CP0 is supposed to be their allies. Vegapunk explains that they have come to kill him and asks if he can drive them away from Egghead, which Sentomaru does not like the idea of, since that would make him a traitor too. Vegapunk then reminds Sentomaru that in the past, he rescued Sentomaru from poverty, so he should decide what to do for himself. Ultimately, Sentomaru agrees to fight back against CP0. When Sentomaru arrives with S-Shark, S-Snake, and S-Hawk, CP0 see him and Kaku tries to order S-Bear to take him down, but Stussy says that is impossible. She is proven correct when Sentomaru takes control of S-Bear and has it attack CP0. Stussy says that the rank of authority the Seraphim follow is very different from the Pacifistas. The 5 elders have the highest authoritative chip, Vegapunk and his satellites having the second, Sentomaru the third, and at the bottom whoever else. Additionally, not even the 5 elders can command the Seraphim over a Den Mushi. Kaku adds that Seraphim are a huge asset to the world government, which means they cannot destroy the cyborgs, and he curses Lucci for seemingly not thinking this through. Luffy uses an attack called Gomu Gomu no Mogura pistol that causes him to stretch his fist into the ground and redirect it up to Lucci's chest to hurt him. Sentomaru orders S-Snake to guide the Straw Hat Pirates to the Frontier Dome using Vacuum Rocket, and orders S-Hawk and S-Shark to hold off CP0. Jinbei asks Chopper and says, are my eyes playing a trick on me? Chopper says, I thought he looked familiar. Jinbei says, those brown guys look like ex-warlords. Don't tell me they cloned us. Luffy is happy to see Sentomaru and calls him Battle Axe. Sentomaru says, don't just nickname me based on my weapon, Straw Hat. We are not friends. Sentomaru asks and says, anyway, are you really gonna help Grandpa Punk escape? Luffy with a big smile on his face says, yeah, he asked me, don't sweat it. Battle Axe replies and says, I'm not sure I can trust you. You're an emperor after all, and what's up with your appearance? Just then, Lucci stabs Sentomaru with Shugen and he falls, with Lucci saying that all they need to do is take down the control tower to get the Seraphim under their control. Luffy runs to Sentomaru and apologizes to him for distracting him. Sentomaru, however, tells Luffy that he foresaw Lucci's attack, but he was not fast enough to block it. Lucci tells Sentomaru that he needs him out of the picture if CP0 is to take command of the Seraphim. As he tries to attack him again, he gets intercepted by Luffy, who spins around and slams Lucci far away into a wall with a move the former calls Gomu Gomu no Don Whip. Jinbei calls to Luffy and tells him that they need to get to the real Vegapunk in order to save Atlas, but Luffy ends up spinning himself so hard that he cannot stop himself from doing so, and he even unintentionally heads towards the opposite direction of his crew. Meanwhile, the Seraphim continue to push back CP0, with Kaku saying that they are unstoppable, and even if they destroyed them, they would still consider it a loss. Stussy even adds that the most terrifying aspect of it all is that the Seraphim are still only children. Up on the labaface, Frankie asks Vegapunk if the ability that S-Shark is using is the Sway Sway no Mi that Senor Pink ate, and if it means Senor Pink is dead now since there can be no two users of the same devil fruit at the same time. Vegapunk tells Frankie that Senor Pink is in fact alive and confined in Impel Down, and Frankie asks in response if Vegapunk copied his devil fruit. Vegapunk clarifies that he is only capable of replicating Zone devil fruits, which he considers the process of doing so vastly different and more acceptable from Caesar Clown's Smile production. He also says that with unlimited resources, he could replicate even the special types of Zone fruits, though he is not sure if he can get them to awaken. He says that he tried to replicate Logia fruits, but found it to be very complicated. For Paramesha fruits, however, he found an alternative method of replicating their powers by synthesizing blood from a Paramesha user's lineage factor, i.e. the green blood, flowing through S-Shark, S-Bear, and S-Snake right now, which allows the latter two to use the Nikyu Nikyu no Mi and Mero Mero no Mi respectively. Vegapunk concludes saying that the Seraphim are the culmination of all of his ideas and may go down in history as the most powerful beings that ever existed in the world. Frankie is left in awe as Nami realizes that this was the reason the 7 warlords of the sea had been abolished, while Usopp panics over the nature of what Vegapunk has just created, with Sanji and Robin even adding that they consider the Seraphim a threat to them. Down in Fabrio face, Lucci recovers and charges for Sentomaru once again, but Luffy intercepts him again and tries to bite down on him. Lucci sidesteps him and Luffy fires the rubble he chomped down on at Lucci, who either tries to dodge or destroy. Luffy then backs up into a pipe that he makes rubber and fires himself at Lucci at rocket speed in a move he calls Gomu Gomu no Don Rocket, nailing him square in the chest. Lucci goes flying once again as he calls Luffy's devil fruit insanely powerful, and that he's starting to lose consciousness. Chopper and Jinbei are then directed by S-Snake to the vacuum rocket, which will take them up to Labaface. Jinbei thanks her and says that it is nice to see a kind version of Boa Hancock for a change, though S-Snake claims she was only following orders. With only 1 minute before the vacuum rocket departs, Chopper once again calls to Luffy. Sentomaru tells Luffy that he trusts Vegapunk with him and his crew, and he promises to help him escape. Luffy gets into the rocket. Bonnie gets waken up by the rocket and she asks where she is and where Vegapunk is. Jinbei replies and says you have come to. Stay calm, we're on the vacuum rocket. Bonnie asks who the hell is this supposed to be. Jinbei replies and says it's a long story. But that's Luffy, but let's save the explanation for later. A voice is heard saying the approximate journey time from Fabrio Stadium to the Labor Stadium is 32 seconds. And says the Frontier Dome has been fortified. Intruders have infiltrated, be on high alert. And tells the lab workers to barricade the factory shelters properly. Kaku says you have to hand it to him. Vegapunk wouldn't ask for a better bodyguard. This is a real pity Sentomaru. Stussy says our orders are to wait for the Marines. Lucci says, if we wait too long they will get away. Usopp says they seriously want you dead. Wouldn't that be a waste to the government? You're the smartest man in the world. And would you rest easy if you thought such intellect may turn against you? Vegapunk says not that I ever intended to do so, mind you an Emperor's crew showing up just as things come to a head. What a serendipitous twist of fate. Nami says oh yeah, I suppose it would make sense to snuff out a potential liability like you. Usopp says how can you talk about snuffing someone out like that? Nonetheless, Usopp and Frankie agree to let Vegapunk on board their ship, with Frankie in particular gushing at the notion of Vegapunk inspecting his ship. Chapter 1070 then shifts perspective to Lucci's group. Lucci orders the Seraphim to block every exit and says there are 6 Vegapunk left, including the real Vegapunk. Kaku says yeah but that defense system of theirs sure is a tough nutcracker. Sentomaru on the ground coughs. Lucci replies and says I don't care, I won't let any of those brats get away. Meanwhile, Luffy's group manage to find a place to get Atlas patched up as Bonnie leaves to confront Vegapunk once again, saying that if he cannot turn her father back to normal, then she has no choice left but to kill him, even though others noted that she had simply lashed out in anger. Out at sea, Kizaru makes his way to Egghead with a fleet of warships. He says that theoretically the Straw Hats teaming up with Vegapunk will make for an easy escape, but he does not intend for it to be so. Lucci orders his marines to destroy the ships if you need to. And says even with the Seraphim back under control, how are we meant to flush them out? This Frontier Dome is a real nuisance. Kaku says it sure is a marvel. Shaka says the agents are attempting to block off all exist. They have probably taken care of the ships too, and Vega Force 01 can only fly on the island. Damn, the enemy is quite shrewd. Lilith says perfect, that means we get to avenge Atlas. I'm raring to go. Vegapunk says so they won't let us get away without a fight. The girl that's eating says what's going on. Vegapunk Edison says I have just thought of up a new invention. Shaka tells Lilith if all she has got in mind is another brainless attack, knock it off. Chapter 1071 then shifts to Stussy saying you are determined to ignore the Navy, aren't you, Lucci? Lucci replies and says I refuse to accept Straw Hat as an emperor. Stussy replies and says you are hopeless. Chapter 1071 then shifts to Lilith shouting and says, why can't we retaliate against these fools? They are after our necks. Pythagoras says fighting back isn't our objective, ensuring the main body's escape as satellites is our duty to prioritize. The Stella's safety above all else, we may be expendable. Shaka says you running off on a vendetta will only cause us more trouble. Lilith replies and says, that goody-good act of yours is really getting on my nerves. Shaka replies and says that's too bad. Vegapunk apologizes to Sentomaru and says that only happened because you're so loyal. Vegapunk then says I'm all packed, please take the 7 of us to your ship. Usopp asks if 7 of them are coming. Nami says that sounds like a pain. Sanji says I don't care so long as Lilith tags along. Frankie is excited and says a voyage with 7 faces of the world's best scientist. In lab interior, Luffy and Chopper try to stop Bonnie. Bonnie with an angry face says that Vegapunk. To think he'd stop to using bugs against me. Chopper says is that what you're mad about? Luffy tells Bonnie to not hurt Vegapunk because he promised to get Vegapunk out of Head Egg. For some reason, the Frontier Dome's defenses have turned off. CP0 takes advantage of this sudden malfunction and infiltrates Labaface. After spotting the Thousand Sunny, Kaku tries to destroy it with Rankyaku, Amane Dachi, but it gets blocked by Zoro, who was woken up from his nap in response. Kaku is surprised to see his old adversary again. As the satellites get the Frontier Dome back online, they realize that they were too late in keeping CP0 out. They also notice that unless they do something, they may lose their ride off the island, which means they may have to fight back. Pythagoras says indeed they are already fighting a crew member that was guarding it. If we don't hurry and back him up, the ship will be destroyed. Lilith, while looking like a badass, says will you look at that? We get to go to war after all. Luffy shouts and says hey guys, and Nami replies and says Luffy. Chapter 1071 shifts to Luffy saying we are leaving now. But we just got here. Come on, let's not rush this. Usopp replies and says I wanna stay too. But we can't help it since this is a government island. You already bumped into that Rob Lucci guy. Luffy says I know, but have you seen Bonnie? She's a pirate lady with long hair. Robin says now that you mention it, where is Vegapunk? Vegapunk, while being attacked by Bonnie, says stop it Bonnie. We're in a rush here, I'll explain, just hear me out. Bonnie replies and says shut up. And says can you turn my dad back to normal? Yes or no? Vegapunk replies and says no. Sorry, I just can't, but there's a reason for that. Bonnie turning herself into a crying child in order to get Dr. Vegapunk's sympathy. When Vegapunk approaches her, she turns into a buff adult version of herself, almost appearing bloated like a balloon. It states that, it seems Bonnie's powers can make her turn herself into different variations of her future self or something like that. Vegapunk tells Bonnie to stop, and even if you kill me timely. Bonnie hits Vegapunk on the back with a crowbar. Nevertheless, Bonnie then knocks Dr. Vegapunk's ages out of him in the form of sparkling jewels, seemingly giving his different life stages a tangible form. She decides to turn him into a baby who is able to talk, which we suspect is due to his genius brain. Dr. Vegapunk says I suppose these shiny doodads are a manifestation of the years I just lost. And Shoutly says you turned me into a helpless child. Give me back my golden years back. Bonnie tell Vegapunk to calm down and says my power doesn't last forever on living things. Then Bonnie with an angry face says you said you had a reason, well you better start talking. And she asks Vegapunk why he killed her father. The chapter then shifts to Red Port where Kuma is seen climbing the red line. And someone says there is no way he will make it up way up there. Dr. Vegapunk tells Bonnie that he can't share why he turned her father Bartholomew Kuma into a cyborg in the past. He claims that the reason would cause her great pain, and thus he promised his friend Kuma that he would never, ever tell her the truth. Bonnie replies and says you are saying you can't tell me why you had to kill my father. Do I look like I was born yesterday? Stop screwing around. Vegapunk says I'm not trying to pull a fast one here. You need to believe me. Nobody made that decision for him. Kuma chose that fate for himself. Bonnie replies and says you're a liar. Dad would never choose to die and leave me. I'll kill you. Vegapunk says this is hard for me too. I wish I could forget the ordeal. And says Kuma is an incredible man. I have always been proud to call him my close friend. Bonnie, please understand I can't say anything more on their matter. Bonnie, while abusing Vegapunk, says just spit it out. I'm not gonna swallow your half-ass excuses. Vegapunk replies and says this is child abuse. Bonnie hears a beep beep sound, then she turns and starts walking towards the sound. Vegapunk tell her to pay no attention to what's over there. It's got nothing to do with Kuma, you hear? Bonnie replies and says that's obviously a lie. Bonnie then finds a room with a bare paw at the door. She destroys the door's lock by aging it up, similar to how Shinobu's ripe fruit works. A flashback focused on Kuma and Dr. Vegapunk then begins, with Kuma looking similar to how he did in Ohara. Kuma, meanwhile, wears a white patient's robe with no hat, showing his hair and glasses. Dr. Vegapunk tells Kuma that a scientist in West Blue discovered that humans weigh 21 grams less after they die, arguing that 21 grams is the weight of the human soul. He then explains Kuma's paw fruit ability, saying it has the power to turn intangible things into something tangible. An example of pain is given, with Dr. Vegapunk explaining that this can be achieved by turning nerve signals into tangible energy which he can push out of a body. We see drive. Vegapunk argue that Kuma should be able to do the same with imagination, thoughts, or memories as well. Dr. Vegapunk then asks Kuma to try and bring out his own memories since he wants to know the weight and size of the human memory. Kuma is hesitant since it's embarrassing, but Dr. Vegapunk begs him to do so for science's sake. The issue then returns to the present, where Bonnie enters the room with the bare paw at the door. Vegapunk says I'm sure you're familiar with Kuma's powers. There's nothing there but pain. It's more than enough to kill someone. Chapter 1072 then shifts to Kuma being shot at by the Marines. One Marine says don't let him get to Mary Geoise. Bonnie says I know my father's ability all too well. A Vice Admiral says seize him and make sure you finish him off. He's still alive. Bonnie, while trying to touch the bubble that Kuma made, says his memories are here, aren't they? Chapter 1072 shifts to Nami saying what? Rob Lucci really made it up all the way here. Shaka says my apologies, the system malfunctioned. Usopp says it's a good thing Zoro and Brook are on the ship. There's no way they would lose. Even if it's 2 against 3 they'll figure something out. Shaka spots something and tells Usopp to look again. The battle is far more lopsided than you think. Usopp says those Seraphim things are here too. They made it all the way here. Now it's 7 against 2, they are up against the best of the best. And says they called in backup while the barrier was down. It is revealed here that the Seraphim's personality allows them to react and make decisions on their own to adapt to battle situations. Lucci says we didn't order them to come. It's not like we can make them go back now, the dome is operational again. Edison says the enemy made a serious miscalculation. Now that they are up here we can turn the Seraphim back to our side. Since we are in the command hierarchy, Edison and Lilith are seen heading out to go and assist Zoro and Brook. Edison says that's assuming we get there in time to holler our orders at them. Till then they are still a huge threat. And says I hope those two can hang in there. Lilith is excited to go. Shaka says I'll leave it to you two, Edison and Lilith. Lilith says get off you high horse. Sanji says to think Moss Head would croak right when we are so close to getting the One Piece. Nami says you go too. This threat affects the whole crew. Sanji, while going to help Zoro and Brook, says Nami's orders are absolute. Still, why do I have to save him? Frankie replies and says don't screw around Swirlifum. This is serious. Chapter 1072 shifts to Brook and Zoro. Brook says what the devil is he supposed to be? Zoro replies and say well he's meant to be a giraffe, but seems a little different from what I remember. Not that it matters, he's gonna wind up a diced up cops either way. Kaku replies and says that's only if you can cut me. Zoro tells Brook to look after the ship. Chapter 1072 shifts perspectives to Zoro versus Kaku. Kaku is now using an awakened form, which is similar to Lucci's, sporting dark flame hair, and a stream of floating dark fire wraps around his shoulders. Kaku uses some old and new attacks in the fight, but One Piece Chapter 1072 sees Zoro eventually overpower Kaku and knock him down to the ground easily. Chapter 1072 then sees Lucci order the Seraphim to destroy the lab before Dr. Vegapunk or his satellites can come out. Shaka says this is bad. Nami is terrified and says they are going to annihilate the lab. As the four Seraphim start attacking the building together, Kaku's neck is suddenly bitten by someone, causing him to fall asleep. Lucci with a shocked face says, "What the hell are you doing, Stussy?" It is then revealed that Stussy is the one who bit Kaku, now seen with vampire-like wings and fangs. Stussy says, "Who, me? I'm just putting him to sleep," and asks Lucci to kindly join him, and says, "I think it's time for your cat nap." Her true identity is revealed as the clone of Ms. Buckingham Stussy, one of the Rocks Pirates' former members. Additionally, it is also revealed that she's the first successful human clone of Mads. Lucci says this is a hard pill to swallow. The chapter then shows Lucci attacking Stussy. However, he misses since he's attacking an illusion, with Stussy using a kami-e paper art technique called remaining body. Stussy says, "So when you don't understand, your first instinct is to kill." While Lucci is distracted by the illusion, Stussy uses a lipstick bottle with sea prism stone in it to weaken him by pressing it against his body. Lucci says, "You bitch." Stussy replies and says, "I know how strong you boys are, fighting you fair and square would have been stupid." Stussy then bites Lucci, causing him to fall asleep, like Kaku did. Brook says, "Just a moment, what is this? Why are the CP0 agents at each other's throats?" Zoro says, "Friendly fire." Stussy contacts Pythagoras and says, "I put them both to sleep." Pythagoras says, "That's fantastic news, Stussy came through." Usopp asks what's going on. Chapter 1073 finally confirmed that Stussy is whom Dr. Vegapunk spoke with and that it wasn't Dr. Vegapunk's intention for her to become a CP0 member. Robin says, "You had a mole in the intelligence branch." It's also confirmed that despite being an ally, Stussy can't stop the Seraphim as she's on the same level as Lucci in the hierarchy. This prompts Vegapunk Lilith and Vegapunk Edison to come out of the Lab Stratum building. Zoro says, "We need to stop those ruts before they flatten the others." Brook replies and says, "Right, and is it me or do those kids look familiar?" Zoro replies and says, "I know, especially that one." S-Hawk tries to attack Lilith before she gives the order to stop, but Zoro blocks the Seraphim and engages in a clash with it. S-Hawk is seemingly in shock with regard to Zoro's strength. Zoro says, "On similar inspection you're not the same, you actually have a spark of humanity still." Zoro asks the Seraphim, "What are you?" S-Shark then attacks Edison, but immediately tells the Seraphim to stop. Lilith says no, he can't be, but he's saved by Sanji. Zoro says the Seraphim finally stopped, and can someone tell me what these things are? Stussy tells Shaka that she bound Lucci and Kaku with sea stone. Shaka says, "Much appreciated, Stussy. We are leaving the island, you should come with us." Stussy says, "Understood." Usopp says, "Hey, you can't keep adding people." One Piece chapter 1073 then shifts to Luffy and Chopper, who are running around a lab stratum looking for the real Dr. Vegapunk since he and Bonnie disappeared. The narrator says, "A truly unexpected development. Dr. Vegapunk's main Stella body has vanished." However, neither they nor fans see any trace of the pair in the issue, prompting the scene to change to Kizaru's ship, seemingly still on its way to Egghead Island. Someone calls Kizaru and says, "We made snacks and tea for our guest." Kizaru replies and says, "I'm sure you remembered to test for poison, right?" The subordinate says, "Of course, sir." Kizaru says, "I'll take it to him, go back to your post." The admiral himself is seen bringing some snacks and drinks to an old man on the ship. After bringing the man his food and drink, Kizaru has a conversation with him. Kizaru asks him if he's ever met Dr. Vegapunk, to which the old man says yes, but just once in the past, and says, "I think what's going on is truly a shame." It is then excitingly revealed that the old man is one of the Gorosei members, specifically the one with a scar on the left side of his face and the gray dreadlocks. It is also revealed that his name is Saint Jagarcia Saturn, with the issue coming to an end as Saturn says he regrets that it has come to this. World government officials find themselves attacked by a different model of pacifista. This one is capable of generating a bubble shield from its hands that can defend against any attack, causing it to be called the strongest shield Dr. Vegapunk has created. This model is dubbed Mark III, far surpassing the prototypes used during the Summit War of Marineford. The attacking pacifista demands the agents surrender and move to Factory B. They do so as they question who was able to give it commands. The one responsible turns out to be Sentomaru, who has woken up and is currently being treated for his wounds. He realizes that the Frontier Dome has been closed and he can no longer contact Vegapunk, and on top of that, the Marines have been looping their communications so he cannot get any updates. Still, Now that he has rebelled, he will continue to do as he pleases. As such, he orders the rest of the Mark III Pacifista to mobilize and ensure that the Straw Hat Pirates escape Egghead Island safely with Dr. Vegapunk, and also to keep an eye on the coast as the Marines are acting strange. In the labaface, Luffy is resting after all of his running around and fighting, which also resulted in his shoes breaking. He asks where Vegapunk and Jewelry Bonnie are, to which Shaka says that Bonnie is still within the building, and says everything in the lab is transmitted to this monitor. Luffy replies and says, you could have told me sooner. As it is constantly being monitored, Zoro, Brook, and Stussy make their way inside with new outfits. Brook says this play is marvelous, they have everything. Zoro says I thought we were leaving. Stussy says where is your Stella body, did something happen? Shaka tells everyone present including Atlas, who was repaired, that they have a couple of issues, just keep calm and listen. Shaka says first the Stella has disappeared, second we have lost control of the Frontier Dome. Someone says what? How can that be? Shaka tells everyone that they are trapped in the Labo Stratum. Everyone in the lab say seriously. Shaka continues and says if we tried to leave, the lasers would likely fry us. Usopp and Chopper says what? How can we leave? Shaka says quite, and the dome is really a secondary concern when you consider your main passenger is missing. We should prioritize finding the Stella first, I'll figure out a way to repair the dome in the meantime. Frankie replies and says how are we meant to find him, if he's not shown up in any of your monitors? Shaka admits this to be true, surmising that the Seraphim caused some damage that may have caused their Kamiko surveillance Den Mushi to either be incapacitated or moved out of position, resulting in a blind spot where the Stella may be. And says his having every worker and the other satellites searching for him, he might have passed our blind spot. Pythagoras contacts Shaka and tells him that there is no one on the third floor in Building C, and he asks him to check the next one. Nami decides to go and find him, thinking that the faster they do the faster they can leave the island, and she hopes to get some treasure from him. The other Straw Hats and Stussy decide to help find him, but when Zoro decides to go, Sanji says hold up Moss Head, you are going to find someone, but who will find you when you're done? Chopper says he's right. Zoro, you stay. Robin says just be a deer and wait, okay. The Straw Hats know very well that Zoro will get lost. As such, Luffy and Zoro are left behind to watch over the captive Lucci and Kaku. Zoro says man what a damn pain. Well they're just forming a search party, so I guess they'll be fine. Anyway you must have been running all out right. Luffy replies and says I always go all out for everything. Can't believe we bumped up to these guys again. Takes me back to Water 7, I wonder how Ice Boss is doing. In lab interior raw room, Vegapunk tells Bonnie not to touch that, but Bonnie says shut it, get out of here. In room NICU, Bonnie finds herself within the memories of her father. She sees him as a child crying, but is unable to do anything as she watches some other people force him to come back, saying they will all die if he does not. Kuma vehemently refuses, saying he would rather die himself. He gets caught and beaten by the other people, where he begs to be saved as Bonnie watches with tears in her eyes. Kuma says if just kill me instead, if I go back I'll die anyway. Bonnie tells the people that are beating her father to stop, but she gets ejected from the bubble. Chapter 1074 shifts to Kuma who is still climbing the red line. One of the Marines says Bartholomew Kuma is still going, shoot him down. Bonnie realizes she needs a strong resolve to keep watching his memories, determined to make sure she understands everything about her father. As Pythagoras continues to search for the Stella, he says wow, they really totaled the place, even though they were born here. Someone approaches him from behind, and an explosion goes off in part of the lab. On his news balloon, Morgans has received information. His source tells him the world government intends to kill Vegapunk. They plan to kill the world's greatest genius. It's like Ohara all over again, but they have miscalculated this time. The good doctor is far too popular for this fly. He's loved as the man that develops energy to light up towns the world over. Morgan says fortunately guess who else happens to be on the island? This guy. So let's make the headline, Navy skirmish at Egghead, Emperor Straw Hat Luffy takes Vegapunk hostage. I'm sure the government will appreciate that spin, and go collect their contributions. Yes, that's outrageous. Nefertari Vivi, who was with him, angrily tells him that Luffy would never do something like kidnapping, and she voices her disgust with his newspaper. Wapol, who was also there, begs her to keep her voice down, fearing that the government has agents watching and listening in on them. Morgans tells Vivi she has no right to interfere with his work after she spent the previous day crying her eyes out. He also tells her that he does not care if his stories are lies or the truth. as long as they are entertaining, since he is the only one who can shake up the world. Shaka tries to reach Pythagoras following the explosion he heard, but he receives no response. He sends a Kamiko to search the tower, but someone takes it out, cutting off the security image. Luffy realizes that the communication device he is wearing does not operate any longer, as if all communications have been cut off. Zoro says, "What's up, Luffy?" Luffy asks Shaka if something wrong with the communication, and says everyone's voice cut off suddenly. Throughout the lava face, everyone is searching for Dr. Vegapunk. In Tower A Floor 3, Nami and Brook are traveling with Edison. Nami gets sidetracked by diamonds. Edison says, "Hey, aren't you being a bit forward? Most just say they're pretty." Brook says there is no harm in it, right? Everyone is evacuating after all. Edison says, "You are not wrong there, but I still reckon you folks have got a screw loose." Nami with a bag of jewelry replies to Edison and says, "Phew, this is heavy, should we all get back?" Edison angrily says, "We are supposed to be looking for the Stella." Nami disappointedly says, "Fine, I'll just leave them for now, but we better come back for them." Edison says, "You know those diamonds are man-made. They are meant to be for industrial purposes only." Nami says, "What? You can make diamonds?" Edison replies and says, "What's with that look on your face?" Nami says, "The future really is a place for dreams." Edison says, "Enough already. Stella, where are you?" On floor 2, Chopper and Robin are with Atlas, who reveals that her face is a mask and she can replace whatever part of her gets damaged. Robin then notices something which Atlas reveals is an artificial organ, which amazes Chopper, though Robin notes she thought Vegapunk had gotten chopped up, much to Atlas' discomfort. In the command room, 4th building A, Luffy asks Shaka what's going on, but Shaka is not paying attention, and says, "Edison, do you read me?" Luffy tells Shaka that I could hear everyone fine a second ago. "I swear I didn't break it or knock it, or anything else." Shaka says it's not that and tells Luffy to look at the monitor. Shaka says the camera feeds, they are going out one after another. Luffy is confused of what Shaka is saying. Shaka tells Luffy that there is someone in the lab. Luffy is shocked and says, "What?" In the B Tower, Sanji and Jinbei have gone with Stussy, with Sanji swooning over her and asking if she would call him a dog, while she flirtatiously reminds him to find Vegapunk. Jinbei acknowledges how huge the part of the lab they are in is as Stussy reveals that they are on the weapons manufacturing floor, so they can't be setting off any shockwaves. As for the last group, which consists of Usopp, Frankie, Lilith, and York, the 4 head to Tower C. Usopp says, "A bubble gun." Lilith replies and says, "That's right, it makes strongest bubbles that can bounce anything back." Usopp asks what kind of an attack just bounces off. Frankie yells for Vegapunk's name. The group end up finding Pythagoras' body, albeit with his head missing. Thankfully, Pythagoras turned out to be fine, as he had detached his head from his body before he sustained damage. He starts freaking out over what happened. Lilith says, "What happened? Some kind of an accident?" "No, this looks like an attack." Pythagoras replies and says, "It was the darndest. It'll sound impossible, but I know my eyes were not playing a trick on me. I'm forced to wonder if we made a grave miscalculation." Lilith tells him to spit it out already. York walks over to S. Snake. She tells her to wait outside since Edison ordered her to stand down, but instead, S. Snake petrifies York. A confused Lilith tries to get her to stop, but S. Snake ignores and fires a laser at the 4. It destroys the bridge they were on and they all fall, though they land safely. Lilith tries to reach Shaka but fails to do so, and when Frankie suggests they fight back, Lilith tells him it is impossible to beat a Seraphim. Back in Tower A, Zoro says, "Luffy, gimme a hand." Luffy replies and says, "What's up, Zoro?" Luffy and Shaka meet up with Zoro as they see that S-Bear and S-Hawk have breached the room. Shaka tells the Seraphim to stop and asks who ordered them to move. Zoro says, "Good, you can stop them, right? They were gunning for CP0, and says letting them die in cuffs would leave a bad taste in my mouth." 2 Seraphim open fire. Thankfully, they evade their attacks while also saving the unconscious Lucci and Kaku, who were in the Seraphim's sights. Shaka says if they won't take my orders, then they may already be acting on Vegapunk's command. Between the communication blackout and barrier closing us in, this is beginning to seem like an elaborate plan. He also realizes that someone is trying to kill everyone by trapping them and cutting off communications, and that they set up this situation very carefully. Lucci and Kaku then wake up. Lucci says they are trying to kill us. Kaku says, "Those no good Seraphim scamps." Kaku says, "Hey Straw Hat and Roronoa, how about we let bygones be bygones?" For now, Lucci tells Luffy and Zoro that they could form a temporary alliance. The two of them would be more useful out of these cuffs, but Zoro and Luffy look disgusted after what Lucci said. Zoro tells Lucci and Kaku that he does not see a future where after they uncuff them, they would let them cuff them later. Kaku states that they will let them restrain them again, which seems to convince Luffy to help them out, despite Zoro claiming that Kaku is lying to them. S-Hawk then unleashes a powerful flying slash attack with his leg, causing Zoro to realize that the devil fruit power S-Hawk is using is the Supa Supa no Mi, used by former Baroque Works agent Daz Bones. After moving out of the way, Kaku says you see Roronoa you keep saving us, you won't get anywhere like this. Shaka says CP0 let me ask, what was your mission here? Lucci replies and says, eliminating all the 7 Vegapunks. Kaku angrily says Lucci, don't just blurt it out like that. Shaka asks and says, and I take it you won't let Stussy off the hook, given her betrayal. Lucci replies and says that's right I won't show her any mercy. Kaku again says are you trying to convince them not to save us? All of a sudden, they hear Nami screaming, which Zoro realizes it means that the other Seraphim are on the loose, and says how are we meant to protect everyone on top of the 7 Vegapunks? Luffy tells Shaka to give him the keys. Shaka throws the keys to Luffy and says I'll leave the decision to you, just please protect the Stella at any cost. Luffy before he uncuffs Lucci and Kaku says, when those 4 guys are out of the way, and you realize you can't beat me, you won't be a sore loser and go after my friends and the Vegapunks right. Zoro calls Luffy an idiot and says these guys won't fall for a taunt like that. Lucci replies to Luffy and says, fat chance, you are the top priority on my hit list straw-hatted bastard, I won't go out of order but your friends won't outlive you for long. Zoro is surprised and says, he took the bait. S-Bear then fires an Ursa shock, ultimately Luffy uncuffs Lucci and Kaku. Luffy assumes Gear 4th and uses Gomu Gomu no Kong Gun while Lucci assumes his hybrid form and uses Rokushiki Ogi Rokuogan to simultaneously attack S-Bear. Zoro and Kaku team up against S-Hawk, blowing him back with Tempest Kick White Thunder and Purgatory Onigiri, and S-Hawk crashes into a wall. World Government Intelligence CP5, CP7 and CP8 agents, one of them says I wonder if we'll ever be allowed to leave, and are we gonna die here? 2 months back, when we meant to set sail after our inspection on Egghead Island, those weaponized sea beasts attacked us, and we were brought back to the island, and all other agents that came to look into our disappearance met the same fate. So I figure you were the one behind it all Dr. Vegapunk. Vegapunk replies and says sorry I'm afraid I had no idea. To think this was happening on Egghead under my nose, how troubling. This whole affair has been baffling right from the start, word leaking to the government about our research into poneglyphs should have been impossible. The Marines are then revealed to be deploying about 100 ships of all sizes from Branch G9 en route to Egghead. In Farbio Stratum Egghead, Sentomaru orders that everyone on Egghead Island flee the island. When they ask him why, Sentomaru tells everyone about Ohara, which was completely destroyed because they defied the world government by studying poneglyphs. The Navy was eventually sent in to eliminate everyone on the island including the villagers. Nico Robin was the sole survivor of the massacre. If the world government is deadly serious about killing Dr. Vegapunk, it is because they have weighed all of the potential scientific consequences and have chosen to eliminate him anyway. As such, he is very certain something even worse than that day will occur on Egghead. In his mind, he desperately asks Luffy to hurry up and leave the island with Vegapunk. While in the command room, Luffy, Lucci, Zoro, and Kaku are struggling to do any lasting damage to S-Bear and S-Hawk. Luffy uses Kong Organ, while Lucci uses handgun Yellow Lotus. They both attack S-Bear. Kaku uses Tempest Kick, but S-Hawk dodges. Zoro uses One Sword Style, Lethal Lion to attack S-Hawk. But the attacks seem not to affect the Seraphim. Luffy says what the heck, they are getting up way too easily, do they think they're Kaido or something, cut it out already. It then occurs to Zoro that the 2 Seraphim resemble King the Conflagration, from the Beast's Pirates. Shaka is surprised to learn that Kaido had a Lunarian in his crew but Zoro tells him that he did not know what exactly he was. Shaka realizes King is Albert, who fled Punk Hazard with Kaido. Shaka confirms that the Seraphim were made using King's lineage factor, prompting Zoro to tell Luffy, Lucci, and Kaku to watch out for the flames on the Seraphim's backs because when they go out, they get faster but lose their defense. He apologizes to everyone for not seeing the connection before they lost their stamina, and says yeah there wasn't much about King to clue me in, he only had a couple of unique features, white hair, brown skin, black wings, and the flames on his back, The others are shocked of what Zoro said, and all of them say you should have put it together sooner. At that point, Shaka leaves the room, telling Luffy he has an idea as to where Vegapunk is. Zoro attacks S-Hawk and says, "Don't get in the way, we are in a bit of a rush." In the third floor building A, Nami prepares to attack and calls out Zeus, and says we can't treat him like a kid. Brook says he's a heartless machine, one of our friends has already been ambushed, and he basically totaled Edison. Nami says he's definitely not a kid, and he's not cute either. Zeus says that's right, Nami, don't hesitate, close your eyes if you have to. Zeus uses an attack called Thunderbolt to attack S-Shark. The attack seems to hurt him, while she sobs and apologizes to Jinbei. Unfortunately, S-Shark dives into the ground just as Brook reattaches his head to his neck. He warns Nami to watch out, but S-Shark emerges and grabs her. But just as Brook is about to retaliate, Sanji charges in and says, "If I ruled a country, my degrees would be simple. Degree 1, anyone who threatens Nami will face capital punishment. Degree 9, anyone who makes her screams will receive a rare fillet strike." Nami says Sanji. Sanji replies and says, "Are you okay, Nami? I can take care of this. You won't get another warning, small fry. I don't give a damn if you're a kid or if you're another Jinbei. I'll be your judge, jury, and executioner." In Building C, Lilith is furious that S-Snake petrified York, so she shoots her with her bubble gun. It grazes her shoulder but causes her to fall over, and Lilith says it is because the bubble was made from the energy of the sea, and since S-Snake has blood synthesized from an existing devil fruit user, she can fall prey to the sea. Usopp says, "You are freaking awesome, Lilith." Frankie tries to subdue her, but because S-Snake was just grazed, she gets back up quickly and knocks Frankie away, and says, "Stay back, you impudent lout." Lilith says, "I guess it's already worn off, that's because it only grazed her." She fires a laser at Usopp and Lilith, but Frankie sneaks up on her, and traps her under a large bubble. Usopp says, "Frankie, you genius." Lilith says, "You used that bubble perfectly." Frankie says, "Give up already, you runt." S-Snake pleads that she is suffering, causing Frankie to drop his guard long enough for S-Snake to break free and petrify part of his body with perfume femur. Frankie says this petrification power is no joke. Usopp says Frankie is turning into stone, he's gonna die. Lilith fires several bubbles at her, but she dodges them all and charms both her and Usopp before turning them into stone with Mero Mero Mellow. Underground Old Devil Fruit Research Lab, Shaka finds all of the Cypher Pole agents and Dr. Vegapunk contained in a lab that was previously used for devil fruit research. One of the CP0 agents says, "Who is there? Are you the one behind all this? Come out and show yourself." Shaka is left perplexed, because he thought they had come and left ages ago. Vegapunk calls Shaka. Shaka says, "Stella, so this is where you were. Who could have done this? I'm glad you are okay, let me help." Vegapunk asks him who is currently with him. Shaka turns around to see who he is talking about, only to be shot in the head, much to everyone's horror. Shaka collapses as Vegapunk hears footsteps, with a look of horror etched onto his face. In lab interior, Sentomaru says Uncle Kizaru is coming here, to which Stussy confirms, and says CP0 was meant to wait for his arrival after eliminating Vegapunk. Sentomaru replies to Stussy and says the government's pulling all out the shop's hut. Stussy says, "Indeed, I think they consider this incident to be far more severe than Ohara. For one, the doctor continued the scholar's forbidden research, he's taken it much further. Second, not like Ohara, Egghead actually has formidable combative and defensive capabilities." Sentomaru says, "When you put it like that, it's no surprise they're coming loaded for bear." Stussy tells Sentomaru to call her if there is any developments, and says all the other transportation on the Labo Stratum are down. After she hangs up, Sentomaru tells the islanders that they can't hesitate and they all must flee the island before the Marines arrive, which they all start to do. One of the citizens says, "Prepare the ships, we need to get off the island, quickly before the Marines show, listen to Sentomaru." In Building C, Frankie yells for the names of Usopp and Lilith. Frankie, who is only partially petrified, demands S-Snake undo the petrification she did to him, Lilith, and Usopp, claiming that he can still fight with the part of them that isn't stone. S-Snake ignores him, however, and turns to Pythagoras. He demands to know who ordered S-Snake to do this, but all she does is stomp on and crush him, resulting in a huge explosion. As she starts to walk away, Frankie tries calling her again. On the second floor of Building A, Chopper, Robin, and Atlas are flying around looking for Vegapunk. Chopper says, "Those Seraphim and explosion, I hope everyone's alright." Robin says, "I tried checking, it seems the Seraphims are running amok." Atlas says, "You are mistaken, that doesn't make any sense." Chopper says one thing for sure, when Nami screams a certain someone will always dash to her and instantly aid her. Robin says we should focus. I bet everyone's pinned down. Since they are fighting, what if something happens to Vegapunk's main body, while they are distracted? Chopper says good point. Atlas says that she may have an idea as to where the Stella is and the two follow her lead. On the third floor, Nami tries to help Edison while Brooke decides to go look for Vegapunk, while Sanji continues his fight with S-Shark. Sanji says don't act so surprised, this is the undying power of love. On the fourth floor, Zoro realizes that S-Bear and S-Hawk's flames are not going out, but Luffy notices that S-Hawk has left the room. Lucci says that S-Hawk is choosing to prioritize killing the weaker members of the crew and save the more troublesome members for later, thinking they will be too rattled to fight effectively. Zoro immediately runs after S-Hawk, and Luffy says quick go help him Usopp before he gets lost. Kaku says man what a bother. Kaku runs after Zoro and says slow down Roronoa. Luffy plans on using an attack, but Kaku says wait who are you calling Usopp? Luffy uses Hawk Gatling and says I'll blast that fire away. Lucci yells at Luffy and says use your pathetic brain, it doesn't matter how much you try hitting it, that won't work. Meanwhile Bonnie is still looking through her father's memories, and what she is seeing has brought her down to her knees and she begins crying profusely. Around 3 months ago, someone contacted the 5 elders and told them that Dr. Vegapunk was researching the contents of the Void Century. CP5 was dispatched to investigate but they found no evidence, yet the ship that left with them suddenly disappeared. CP7 and CP8 were dispatched to investigate but they too disappeared. Then, the mysterious person contacted the 5 elders again, and eventually they came to believe that Vegapunk had betrayed the world government. Choosing to assassinate him, CP0 was dispatched to handle the situation, and one of the elders chose to go in person as they expected Vegapunk to retaliate. Reinforcements were requested from various marine branches, meaning war was looming on the horizon. However, the sudden and unexpected appearance of Emperor Straw Hat ship left the government forces feeling more than a little disquieted by this complications. One of the elders says did you say Straw Hat, him again? The narrator says in any case, this chain of events is going to culminate tomorrow, and the outcome will shock the whole world. Down in the hidden lab, the person who shot Shaka enters the lab as Vegapunk says this was all you're doing, and asks why they are doing this. The person turns out to be York, who evilly tells Vegapunk that she wants to become a world noble. Vegapunk angrily asks why she would want to be such a thing since she has been to Mary Joie's in the past and seen how horrible they are, but York just laughs and says that he sounds like Shaka, though she now considers him dead. York then tells Vegapunk that she thinks it's too confusing that so many people are walking around calling themselves Vegapunk, and that the world will be better off with just one of us. Hey you, yes I mean you, before you leave don't forget to press that subscribe button, and what are your thoughts on this chapter? Leave your answers in the comments section below.